All right, the property prequel, be in the know before you buy. Crossy, how are you?
Srams, I'm well, mate. How have you been?
Yeah, good, mate. Another week, another hot topic. This one's going to be juicy, mate. Hectic.
It will be indeed. Very topical at the moment, so timing's quite good for this one.
Isn't it? So we're going to dive deep with an expert in this field around tenant. This one's going to add, I reckon, a heap of value, not only to tenants wanting property as well, like in terms of rentals, but also for investors as well. So we want to sort of cover this whole space, and it's super topical because I don't know if you've checked some of the latest data on vacancy rates, mate. We're at all-time low, under 1%, especially in southeast Queensland in particular. Mate, it's crazy.
It is crazy. I mean, you talk vacancy rates, and for anyone who sort of takes an interest in the field, if they talk 2% vacancy rate or less, that's a tight rental market. Here in southeast Queensland and in some pockets of the Gold Coast, we're talking 0.4, 0.5%. So it's crazy, and today's guest will be a really good one to give us some insight into how that looks on the ground, doing, some inspections and some letting, opening the doors for prospective tenants. So, mate, hopefully we'll add a heap of value. And as you said, Srams, really interesting for investors because, as you and I both agree, it's a great time to be looking to buy at the moment, which I know seems counterintuitive for a lot of people given the headwinds and the headlines, and every time you turn the TV on, it seems to be negative. But, good investors invest against the grain and yes, against consumer sentiment. So I reckon today will be a ripper.
Yeah, it will be. So we've got Shaun Carney on, the Shaun Carney from 44 Home Property Management. If you're in southeast Queensland in the property management space, I'm sure you know Shaun and his company. So he's a director there at the company, and mate, they're pure property management. They don't do sales, anything like that. They're pure property management. So he's sort of my go-to when it comes to anything. How's the tenancy market doing? As an investor myself, I always like to keep check on vacancy rates, days that things are staying leased for, unleased, all those sorts of things. So we're going to dive deep, and this is going to add a ton of value. So Shawnee, thanks for popping on, mate.
Gents, how are we?
Morning, mate.
Hello.
Good to see you. Long time no see. Mate, rip straight in. 44 Home Property Management. Super niche. I love it. I love a niche business. Mate, where'd you sort of start, and where did that all come about? Because I've known you for a while. I wouldn't have expected you to go into the PM space.
Mate, me neither.
Yeah.
I mean, I started, I went to uni, Griffith, and, I moved up to the Gold Coast to play footy, and went to Griffith Uni for a backup plan as a journalist. So while I was doing my uni degree, I was obviously playing footy and needing to work at the same time, and was just working at a standard real estate agency because one of the boys' missus worked there in the PM department, and mate, I was just doing the leasing. It was a pretty cruisy job, not much to it. Go and open the homes and all the rest of it. And once I graduated uni, did a couple of years as a journo, writing and all the rest of it. And then I just bumped into one of the girls that I used to work with at the real estate agency, and we started chatting, and was like, we felt like investors just weren't getting the service that they deserve, because a typical real estate agency, one that's very much sales driven, the PM department kind of gets left to the wayside. And, we sort of felt that, especially some of the investors, and a lot of them are mum and dads, they buy their first investment, and that's, sometimes their retirement if that's the only one that they buy, and they just weren't having a good experience, and then they would sell it, and then they'd never do it again because of that experience. And I didn't like that, one experience would set that person on a path of never wanting to invest again. So we decided to, open up a PM agency specifically for investors. And, we've been doing it for 5 years now.
Awesome. There's a bit of gold there, Srams, already. We'd like to get a bit of gold for our listeners every time, but something that really resonated with me then that Shaun said, and something that I've observed over my sort of 20-odd years being in the game, was around investors having a bad experience first time around and never doing it again. And sometimes that experience can be through a sales agent who's acted in a sort of untoward manner. But most often, it's on the property management side where they've had a bad experience with a tenant, whether it's been, the place has been trashed or there's been unpaid rent and it's left them out of pocket, and they've never actually acted upon an investment property again, which is to the detriment of their future wealth creation strategy or the greater good, their retirement, as Shaun's saying. Really, really interesting on that, because over the years, I've seen so many investors do extremely well out of property, but I've also seen the same amount of investors not do well through good property management strategies. And it's interesting for a young guy like Shaun, as you said at the top, Trams, to realise the niche in the market, because as he said, most real estate businesses treat property management as an afterthought. We've sold the property. Oh, go and talk to our girl at the back or our guy at the back. They do property management, and it's treated because it's not a huge revenue generating business as an upfront thing. Sales commission, you might get $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, $30,000. Property management's a slow burn. What I wanted to ask Shaun was, you obviously identified that early, mate. How hard was it for you to then put your long game hat on and go, okay, well, I know this is not going to make me rich overnight, but I know if I can service my clients really, really well in the short term, build up this client base, this is a really long-term sustainable. Yeah, 100%.
It's a good question. Firstly, it was hard to see sales agents making 200, 300K commission a year. Meanwhile, we're making $150 a month on one property, right? Yeah. So it is a long game. But I think the answer comes down to purpose, and we had a clear purpose at the start, which was we want to make sure that investors, when they go to buy a property, have a good experience, and that one experience can then lead them to making 2 or 3 more purchases over that period of time. The second part to that is that when they do have a good experience, they're going to tell 15 other people about that experience, right? So we ran a lean model real early on, and we picked up a lot of traction just from doing a good job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Personalised service.
Yep. And when they called, we answered. Same day responses. Like we were getting, real early on, and we still get it now. Owners are just like, thanks for calling me back.
Wow. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
thanks for calling me. I just picked up the phone. And you had a problem, let's chat. And then we work it out and then we get it done, right? So, credit to the PM industry. It's a hard job. And a lot of the times the girls that go into property management, it's not always a career for them. I mean, it's a pretty high turnover rate. I mean, you're lucky to get 3 to 5 years out of one property manager, depending on the portfolio that she's managing. And especially if she doesn't have support either. So they can often turn up to work and they're already thinking about the weekend or hanging out with their friends, and, they're not really invested in these owners. So if an owner calls, they're like, I'll get back to it later. I'm going on my lunch break or something like that. So
do you think that's, just thinking about that, because it's a great point, I've seen it myself, some of these young girls, and I'll say young girls not to be sexist, because that's 95% of...
No, at least 90, yeah.
Yeah, of what sort of comes in. Do you think that's because a lot of real estate agency principals obviously want to get as much bang for buck as they can, as in, I'm sure there's a quota of properties that a PM should be having, no more, but do you think that they just load them up early days and they sort of become overwhelmed, as opposed to having that real customer service or centric model where, like you got time to actually call them back? Whereas I've seen some businesses where these poor property managers, man, they don't even have time to have lunch.
No, they're drowning.
Yeah, and
they're not supported. And I feel for them. We run a different model with, the way that I run my agency. But I think there's 2 parts to that answer. I think one, yes, they want to load up a property manager with as many properties as she can possibly manage to make, higher revenue. But also, I think they're still running a very archaic model where one property manager is responsible to do everything, every task that's associated with managing that property, compliance, maintenance, invoicing, rent receiving, open homes, routine inspections.
Wow, trust accounting, all
Yeah,
that.
and they have to do all of that with 200 properties or something, right? So, of course, they're going to burn out. But there's other ways to do it. And I think a principle of an agency that's not truly invested in property management, well, they're not going to put the energy into, trying to make it a more efficient way to support girls, add extra staff to make sure that service is there. And yeah, you might take a hit in revenue, but gee, your investors are going to be happy. So yeah, that's just my take on it.
It's a really good point there, and probably a big tip there if you are like an investor or someone looking to buy an investment property is treat the PM side, and this is a personal experience as well, the PM side as part of your business plan, like part of your team. You got your broker, your buyer's agent, your man on the ground accountant, all those. The PM's got to be a key player because the deal's done, but then the asset nurturing moving forward. And you've got to have someone who's representing the investor, but also the tenant. One thing I've really learned in that space is, man, you got to. There's two parties here, and as an investor, you should be outsourcing. In my opinion, you should be outsourcing that because maintenance is a big one, and things that always come up with a property and managing the property, knowing what the market rent is, so ensuring you're getting the best ROI for your investment as well. So just on that, because you've got a business partner in Lisa, isn't it?
Yep.
And
shout out to Lisa.
Yeah.
Hello, Lisa.
I've had a few dealings with yourself and Lisa, and one thing I do notice is the personal side of things, for sure. Just quickly, before we move on to some tenancy tips and whatnot, but from a business side of things, how did you guys, focus on retention? Because your retention rate seems pretty good with the PMs. Like, if you are looking to get in the industry, what should you be looking out for in a property management space? Because a lot of people do. A lot of people want to get into the industry, but they're in and out pretty quick. So what's some tips you think to anyone wanting to get into the PM world?
It's good. It's a good question. And you're right. A lot of people have a fascination with property, right? And they want to get in, and there's two ways you can go. You can go PM or you can go sales. And if you don't have that sales thing inside of you, which I put my hand up and I go, I don't. I have a great love for customer service. Call me crazy, I don't know why. But for girls, like, and for PMs, I think what you need to find, and you'll find out this really early on, is you'll find culture, but you'll find support. And if your senior PM or the department head of that PM team is invested in supporting everyone within that group, so if there's 3 property managers or 4 property managers, do you have a leasing consultant? What's your workload? And I think, you've got to do a bit of research, and it might take you going to a few different agencies to work out what's an expected workload too, because I feel like, if you've come into the PM industry, you're very green. And if someone says, here's 150, 200 properties and you need to do all these things, you might just think that that's normal. You might not know that there's another way to do it. And the hard thing is to try and find out, or talk to other PMs in that team, but they may also have never left that job either. So, you kind of almost got to network, join some, Facebook groups and stuff like that with PMs, and, ask around and find out what other people are doing, what other agencies, how many properties are they managing? Do they have a leasing consultant? Do they have someone that's just dedicated to doing routine inspections? What's your workload? Because at the end of the day, you've got to enjoy it. And if your workload is too heavy, then you're not going to enjoy the job. And that's why that burnout rate is so high with PMs. The job's hard enough as it is when you're dealing with, tenants that are unhappy with maintenance and owners that are unhappy with arrears. You've got a lot on. So I think, the number one tip is, probably just finding out through, other PMs in the industry what their expectations are around workload and what's normal.
What about the market at the moment, mate? You've been a property manager now both, as you said, working under a business and now having your own business for a number of years. Where do you see things on the Gold Coast and, say, northern New South Wales at the moment from a market point of view? Because, you and I spoke off camera, COVID was an interesting time for everyone, and particularly, that net migration that we saw from Southerners wanting to work from home and realising they could do it on the Gold Coast, or it's Kingscliff or Casuarina or Byron Bay, wherever it was. What are you seeing now, given that things are starting to settle down? There's been a bit more of a directive from some employers around spending some more time back in the office, albeit under probably a hybrid model. How are you seeing the market from the point of view of rentals at the moment?
Look, the market's, the Gold Coast market's definitely still strong. I think, there's probably a couple of factors to that, is that, the Gold Coast is such a great place. Everyone always wants to live here, but people who have had a taste of it over the last 18 months now don't want to leave, right? And I think COVID's made a lot of people question what's truly valuable to them, and whether it's working in the city, earning big bucks, or finding that life balance. So I think the Gold Coast definitely offers that, being a city and being able to, have jobs and all the rest of it. So still very strong. I mean, we're listing properties and, you're still getting 20 to 30 inquiries overnight on it, right? So big numbers and very strong. However, there's pockets, which we can sort of touch on a bit later, where there's different habits with tenants and inquiries and stuff like that. Northern New South Wales, where we've got our second office, what happened during COVID was the Queensland border shut, right, which was super fun for us because we had a New South Wales office and a Queensland office, and we're throwing keys over the border to do open homes and all the rest of it, right? So we were pretty lucky because we had 3 staff on one side and 3 staff on the other. But what happened was we were renting 4-bedroom homes in Casuarina and Kingscliff that were relatively new, a few years old. Excuse me. And we were renting those 4-bedroom homes for about $800 a week, right? COVID kicked into gear, and within a 4 to 6 month period, those rents went to about $1,000 to $1,200 a week.
Wow.
Right? Crazy. And I'd like to tell everyone I knew what was going to happen. That's why I opened the office down there. But I don't think anyone really knew. What we now know is that obviously Casuarina and Kingscliff is the furthest they could come before getting to the border, right? And then they had to wait there to see if they could get into Queensland. A lot of the tenants that we were talking to who were allowed to work remotely, and they're working for Google and Spotify and all the rest of it, big coin, they were saying, look, I'm paying $1,000 a week for a 2-bedroom unit in Bondi, and you're offering this 5-bedroom house on the beach for $800. I'll give you $1,000 a week and I'll pay you 6 months up front.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? And I'm not setting that. The market's setting that price, right? So I go to my owner and I look like the hero, and they're stoked. And so we've had massive growth in Kingscliff, Casuarina, and Northern New South Wales for the last 12 to 18 months. In the last 2 weeks, we've had 4 tenants break lease and are moving back to the city because their bosses are now saying to them, hey, we're happy to give you flexible workplace arrangements and all the rest of it, but we need you in the office 2 days a week. So they're having to fly down, so they're paying for flight costs and accommodation costs. And now all of a sudden, it doesn't make sense to them financially.
Yeah,
right?
interesting.
COVID's essentially done, so the lockdowns in the cities aren't really happening. And that confidence is back where they go, all right, well, I can move back now and take back on my old life. And, some of them actually miss it. It's like, hey, it's been nice for 12 months to live up here, in a pretty quiet coastal town, but I kind of miss the city life. So there's a little bit of a shift in that particular market where owners are now expecting that we can relet those properties at that same price when it's unrealistic, right? Like, what family can afford to pay $1,200 to $1,400 a week? And then, with the cost of living pressures and stuff as well. So those rental prices will need to come down based on demand. How much, we don't know yet. It only seems to be slightly at this point, because there is still people that want to live there, or, they've just sold their house for good money and they're just going to rent for 6 to 12 months until they decide what they want to do. So we still have money and people in the area. But we're just it's an interesting time to see that those, this last fortnight, those people have headed back to the city.
Yeah, it's interesting there, Crossy, with the sales side, but even there from the tenant side, supply versus demand.
Yep.
Right. It's economics 101. Once supply versus demand ratio imbalances one way or the other, even from the tenant side of things, it affects the rent. So big tip there, I guess, for investors is if you're wanting that premium rent, you really want to be targeting places that have a supply-demand imbalance, right? And you just heard it there first. Like some of those people were in those towns as a lifestyle, but then for work and employment opportunities had to move back. So that's why me and you both study the markets, generally those markets that have the amenities, lifestyle, but also the job opportunities seem to always hold pretty strong. Would I be right in saying that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they've got the hospital that they're building in Kingscliff now. I think it's still another 12 or 18 months away, right? That's the new Tweed Hospital that's going there. So that's going to bring in a lot of jobs. Yep. So, but that's still a while away yet, right? Like we've got quite a lot of properties around Tweed Heads and the current Tweed Hospital rent off us, and we have doctors and nurses that sort of stay with us that way as well, which we've done in the past. And so I expect that when that hospital goes up there, it'll be something similar for our properties down there as well. But you're totally right. Like for those people that are living in there, they either have to drive to Gold Coast, Southport for work if they're going to change jobs, right, and they're not going to work remotely anymore, or they're going to Brisbane, which is an hour and a half drive from there. So, it's an important thing to understand as an investor that when you are choosing a property, you sort of got to have those two elements. Yes, it's lifestyle, but it's also employment as well.
You mentioned having obviously the good news to the landlord that based on the fundamentals of the market at the moment, borders closed, people can work from home, the rental market's kicked, I can get you 1,000 a week instead of 800. How's the conversation look now on the flip side when they're used to the 1,000 or 1,100 and now we're heading back towards 900 or 800? Mr. Carney was popular before. What's happening now?
I'm not the fun guy anymore, am I? No, I think, look, it depends on when they purchased, right? Like if they purchased prior to the boom, then they're not over leveraged and they're okay. And the way that I operate is I just give them the numbers, and I give them the report from the back end of, the real estate ads and go, this is, you can see the eyeballs, you can see how many people have viewed it, 300 people have viewed it and you've had no inquiries. There's obviously a price thing there that's causing them to not inquire about that property, right? So a lot of them, are smart enough to understand, it's been a good ride, we've been lucky, we've enjoyed it, and let's be realistic, it's sort of been a bit inflated, right? But there are, some owners where, we really have to have those tough conversations if they are leveraged and they've only purchased in the last, 12 months and that sort of thing. And they've been relying on that, which is tough, right?
Yeah. Which is going to become trickier now in this rising interest rate environment that we're in. If you are over leveraged or over geared, as Pup's saying there, look, it's tricky, and I think if you're in it for the long game, that's the importance of having a really good and professional property manager who can actually hit you with the numbers and sort of get through the white noise and say this is what it is, and be that property professional that I talk about, with our guys that I sort of do some work with is, be a property professional. Don't be a salesperson or a property manager or whatever. Like actually be a professional. Like it's a craft, have stats and figures and facts, and people will respect you. They mightn't like it initially, like you're saying, with the people who are probably over leveraged. However, they will respect you for it if you hit them straight with it.
They also, I'll just add on that, they respect when you call.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's not by an email, it's personal. And it's, mate, I'm sorry. Like, this is a really tough situation. I understand where you're coming from. But this is the reality of the market right now, and this is what we have to do. And they can't be mad at you for doing that, you know what I mean? But they can be mad if you just flick them an email and be like, hey, we're not renting your property out, we've got to drop the price by $100 a week. And they're like, what? Yeah. And then they try and call you and you're not answering the phone, they get the receptionist or something like that, right? So, yeah.
It's crazy. And I just heard you say there, the reality of the market. Speaking of the reality of the market, you'd be sleeping under a rock if you haven't been seeing all these headlines with tenants blowing up, homeless, sleeping. It's sad. It's really, really sad. Mate, is it as bad as what they're making out, you being on the ground as a PM day to day? Give us a bit of insight, Southeast Queensland or your markets. What's the tenant crisis like at the moment?
Yeah, it's tough. It is tough. And I think there's, it's hard because we had such a big migration from the cities during COVID to Queensland. I think, don't quote me on this, but I think the numbers were between 15 and 20,000 people that came to the city, right? And not much difference had changed with stock in terms of new developments and units. Correct. So that's put a lot of pressure. I feel like there is still properties that are available. I just think that sometimes some tenants don't put the energy into preparing. It's hard because before they could just fill out an application, get a call from an agent, they got the property. You got to be a little bit more creative now because there's more people, right? And maybe they just don't know the tips on how to sort of get themselves in on the front foot and be in the top three that get put to the owner.
How does that go for you, mate? Because you're a husband, you're a father, like you're a human being. To see some people that might come to your open and that they desperately need somewhere to live, but they're one of 20 or 30 others, and there's a handful of let's say professionals who are doing everything right. They're giving you their whatever they need to give you, their rent history, their bank statements, whatever it is. And as you said before, they're not really helping themselves in the fact that they've just filled out an application form and they're expecting to get it. And then you've got to make that call and say, listen, unfortunately, you've missed out on this occasion. How do some of those conversations go in recent times?
Yeah, I mean, we've had tenants crying, they hang around at the end of the open home and, we've had mums in tears and they've got 7 days to get out of their property and they've got nowhere to go, and they've been there for 4 years and now the owner's selling. So, it's hard. And, if you were an unemotional person, I'm sure you could just deal with it. That's not me. And I feel that. So what we've been doing is those particular people that have been in dire straits, we stay in touch with them and we give them off-market properties before they go to market.
Great.
I think it's important to sometimes stick with the community, and it's not always about just putting the property to the open market and taking it to the highest bidder in terms of rentals and having people coming in, professionals coming into the Gold Coast from the cities. These people grew up here on the Gold Coast and their kids go to school here, and they went to school here, and they just can't get a look in. They can afford it, right? Like some of these people can afford the rent. They can afford to pay $600, $650, $700 a week, but they just can't get a look in because then no one's just giving them the time of day. And so when I say we put them in off market, it's not like, I'm putting them in a cheaper place or something like that. They're still paying good rent, but someone's actually just giving them an opportunity to find a place. And a lot of the time their rental history is immaculate. But they might have a couple of kids and a dog and, whatever, that,
makes it tough.
Can make it tough, right? So yeah, that's just, I guess, the small part that we can sort of play sometimes and do our best to help out.
Can I just ask quickly, Shrams, just interested to know how many prospective tenants in the current market are offering 6 months rent in advance, or they might have sold their property and they say, here's a lump sum. And, if those prospective tenants you just alluded to about the off-market stuff that we're trying to help the local community, how many times are they having to deal or go up against someone that's just sold, that's got a wad of cash that can actually pay in advance? Because that's tough.
A lot. Definitely in the last 12 to 18 months has been a lot of that. 6 months, 12 months up front, and sometimes we're talking about 40, 50 grand.
Yeah.
you know, and not every young family has that, you know. If you got a young family and the mum and dad are working, you got 3 kids, like not a lot of people have 40 or 50 grand to just throw down on a rental, right? And so that has changed and slowed down quite a bit. So we're not seeing higher offers in rent as much as it might be like 1 out of every 10, whereas before it might have been like 8 out of every 10.
Yeah, right.
So they've dropped down quite a lot in terms of offers of extra money, and the offers of money up front. We do get that when someone really wants the property, but it's not 6 months anymore. It's kind of dropped down to 3 or 2 months in front. Mm-hmm. So, you know.
So we're seeing a shift.
There is a shift.
Yeah.
We still have strong demand, but we are seeing a shift. Yeah.
And if I'm a tenant right now, I know tenants listen to this as well. Just from on the ground experience on what gets tenants, I guess, that foot in the door, makes their application attractive. Can you give some quick takeaways for tenants to secure some property in this crazy rental crisis?
You know, it might sound funny, but create a resume. And I say that with all honesty. Get a A4 piece of paper on a Word document with a photo of your family and yourself and a photo of your pet if you have one, and give me a 400-word introduction and explanation of who you are. Because when I look at an application, or my girls look at an application, they're looking at names, pay slips, income. They're looking at data. They don't know who you are. And yes, we might get a rental reference from another agency, and they say, yes, you paid your rent on time and you looked after the property and routine inspections were great. I still don't know who you are. And so create that resume, and it only has to be 1 page that goes on top of your application. But 1, that shows me that you've made the effort to do that. Mm-hmm. 2, I now feel like I know you. So that gives me a greater gives me a greater sense of trust, and I can then pass that on to the owner.
Yes,
right. So then that gets attached to the email that goes to the owner. But it if you create that resume and you go to the open home, and you know tenants will say, you know, no one ever calls me back. I never get anyone call me back, and no one replies to my inquiries. When you go to that open home, ask that lady that's standing there what's her email address. She's generally the one that's going to process the application. Get her email address, get your resume, and send it directly to her.
Good advice.
It's really good advice, and that's I can vouch for all of that. I remember I had a few rental properties in Brizzy area, and they did that, and I was like, I really like that proactive approach where it felt like I'm helping this family in. So that's an unreal tip, actually.
Really good tip. Really good. What about, just changing tact for a moment, have you got any cracker stories over the years? Probably not so much now because you're running your own business and probably more a high level rental one, but just thinking, what's your best, the dog ate my homework, like tenant story around, I'm in arrears with rent, and
dogs run away with the purse.
You wouldn't believe it.
You wouldn't.
You wouldn't believe it. I was about to pay it, but the dog ran away with the purse. Have you got any of those over the years?
Oh, mate, back in the day, and I mean like 8 years ago, you could take cash. You could still take cash, and you know we would sometimes have guys come in and say, "Oh, I came to pay cash, but no one was at reception." Mate, we're open from 8 till 5. Like, no one's left this desk at all.
We were here.
Yeah, we were here. You did not turn up. But you know, more recently, it's obviously we don't do cash anymore. So it's we usually get my direct debit didn't go through. I'll go down. The bank didn't approve my payment because it didn't know who the sender was. You know, and it's just a constant battle. It's almost like, I can't get my money out of crypto now. So it's
because it's gone. That's why.
Yeah, what crypto?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's more. We get the tech issues now.
Yeah.
And there's a plethora of tech problems that they can come up with. So it always makes us laugh.
What about for landlords, right? So you're juggling tenants, but you also got to juggle landlords, right? Nothing worse PM sends us an email, Matt, this, and this needs. I just same thing. I pretend I didn't see it.
And then you get the follow-up email. Hey, how about a call?
So give us some tips there on managing landlord expectation now, because I could only imagine some landlords, mate, that's all on them. Or like, you know what I mean? How are you? I think it's a real art being a property manager, and a good one. So give us some tips there, because I know you're good at this.
Yeah, it's really tricky, because we get investors and landlords that are like, shut up shop. I just paid $750 a million for this property, and you're not getting another cent off me. I don't care if the door comes off the hinge, like the tenant can fix it.
Yeah.
And it's really tough. Thankfully, there has been some changes in legislation, and there's going to be even more in October that are coming into play that probably a lot of people aren't aware of, that, you know, we have to pass on to the landlord and say, these are your obligations to provide a safe, compliant home for your tenants. And yes, I agree that you don't want to pay the money, but it wasn't a tenant fault. It's a property fault, and unfortunately, you are required to pay it. Sometimes you have to go down that avenue, right? And you have to like really lay it out and go, yes, you've paid a lot of money for this investment, but you also hold a responsibility to provide accommodation for that tenant. It's not, hey, I paid it and I'm done. Wipe your hands of it. You still have a responsibility.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's an investor's responsibility if you're buying an asset for wealth creation.
Well,
part of the
business.
deal is it's business is business. You got to look after, just like you would your staff, you got to look after your tenant as well. So that's a really good point. Have the responsibility if you're a good investor.
Well, the landlord's obligation is to provide safety and privacy for their tenant, you know, and if they don't do that, then why should the tenant pay the rent that's been agreed upon, you know? And I suppose to come back to your initial question, Shrams, is probably with landlords, and you no doubt you have it the same, mate, as what I do for my properties, but you'd have a certain figure where you don't need to annoy me. If it's below that, if it's below $200, just do it, take it from the rent. If it's above 200 or 300, please call me, run it by me. What's standard these days, Pup, as far as a figure goes to get a call?
We used to run 500, which is pretty standard for us. But lack of trades, supply materials, we're finding we can't really get much done for $500 anymore. So that we've had to have some conversations with our owners, and a lot of them understand that. We sort of got to increase it to about $750. You know, by the time the person goes out there, you get the material, all the rest of it. A lot of the time, it's coming in over that 500. So that's sort of increased a bit now.
If you need, like Shrams and I, to go out to do a bit of carpentry work or a bit of maintenance work for maybe $725, $740, we're
If I
available.
want some shonky work done,
Don't
it's
call
good.
us.
It's a good business though, because it'll break in a few months and you get to go back and get paid again.
Yeah. What about? I was just going to say on the front quickly on the landlord piece there. Just lastly, what is that landlord and tenant? Where do you find the biggest pain point being in property management, or whose expectation do you deal with the most, you think?
It's generally the landlord, you know, and a lot of the time it comes down to, I think, their attitude when they purchase the property. Sometimes I think if it's their first one, and they've got buyer's fatigue, so they've just gone through the finance.
Yeah.
They've just gone through finding the property. They've gone through the conveyances, the settle. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
And you're right at the end of the line.
I'm at the end,
Yeah.
and I'm like, hey mate, we need to spend a couple $100 on smoke alarms to make it compliant. You need this, you need that, and he's like, nah,
You're
I'm
joking.
done.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So they can be fatigued by the time they get to me. And I think it's our responsibility as PMs to educate them, right? Especially if it's their first one, educate them on what you're required to do as a landlord and what we expect from you as a landlord. There's been instances where we just don't take properties on. You know, I'll go and do an appraisal and I'll meet an owner.
Just know it's not
And
going to be a fit.
just-
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to work, mate. And, you know, I'm just be honest. And they end up, you know, going to someone else. So it's definitely a relationship thing. And I think, you know, you've got to build that relationship with your landlord at the start, educate them, say this is, you know, and lay those expectations out. Because when you know what the expectations are, you can meet them, right?
That's such good advice. And again, it's an episode for another day about the importance of using a buyer's agent, because I know Shram's pre-frames a lot of that stuff with his clients around, once this happens now, this will happen. And then you get to this stage, and then we're going to roll into this stage. And as part of that is making sure that his clients don't get buyer's fatigue at the end. And, you know, Shaun Carney saying, mate, you got to drop $800 here on this, and it's all factored in. So I reckon that's a really good point if for someone that's not using a buyer's agent, you don't know what you don't know, and then you get to the end. So I think that's important. Mate, wanted to ask you, obviously, young family, business on the increase all the time. What's plans for the future from here? You and Lisa really starting to ramp up. Is there plans for any more offices, or where are you guys at the moment?
Yep. So we've got office in Casuarina and an office in Cooley, and we're just about to open another one in Mermaid Beach. So
Good on you, mate.
Nice.
you know, it's been a, like you said, long game. But yeah, we're hitting our straps now, and you know, got a lot of growth planned for the next done 5, got another 5, and then who knows what's after that.
See what happens, baby.
Yeah.
And just quickly touch on that, because you mentioned it. Super topical at the moment. I've heard a little bit on the changes that are going to more benefit tenants, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
This is really fresh. Is there any, can you give us just a real overview of what some of the changes are, or any ones that really stick out to you?
I can give you a couple because I've still got to learn them myself.
They're really fresh, yeah.
They're very fresh. They've been approved, and they will come into play in October this year. So I've got my hands on the REIQ toolkit, which kind of runs through all of the new legislation that's going to come into effect, which is there's sort of quite a lot to understand. 2 of them that stand out in particular, and they do favour the tenants. A lot of these favour the tenants, and at the end of the day, what they're trying to do is stop people from becoming homeless, right?
Yep.
That's essentially what the idea is. And the second part to that is make sure that the property that they live in is safe, which is why they introduced in Queensland the new smoke alarm legislation at the start of the year. The first one that's quite interesting, as of October, if you're a tenant and your property goes on to a periodic lease, meaning your lease ends and you are still in the property and you haven't signed a new lease agreement, that landlord cannot not offer you or cannot evict you rather for no reason. So as it stands right now, if you're on a periodic lease, I can give you a notice to vacate with no reason. 60 days.
Yep.
See you later. I think it's 60 days.
Yep. As of October.
As of October, there's a specific reasons as to why you would need to leave that property. Couple of them from memory is that it's major renovations that can't be undertaken while you're in the property. The property has been sold with vacant possession. And then there's a couple of other very specific ones, but they've got to have a legitimate reason for you to have to leave that property.
Yeah. So as a landlord, the periods, I don't know, I've heard as well, like the period's longer. It's like 2 months notice now, or the
so
notice
it's 60
period.
days
60
essentially.
days, yeah.
Yep. And this is my biggest gripe when I talk to landlords, right? Because we charge a lease renewal fee. Now, what goes into a lease renewal isn't me just sending that tenant a document for them to sign. We're doing a CMA on the market to understand if we need to lift the rent. We're talking with the owner to see what his plans are. We're talking with the tenant to see what their plans are. We're then proposing that new increased rent, if there is one, to the tenant, which we obviously get rejected. Then we have to go back to the owner. There's a lot that goes into negotiating a new lease. The lease term, are we doing another 6? Are you going to be here for 12? And so that can take a long time to go through. And there's quite a lot of work that goes into that. So we start our lease renewal process like 3 months before it's they're due, because if they're not going to sign it, we then have to give them 60 days. You know what I mean? Like that's so what's going to happen with the new legislation, the way that I'm understanding it, is we offer them, you know, if they agree to it, we offer them the new lease, and we give them the notice to vacate at the same time. So that if they don't sign that lease, that notice to vacate still stands
within the period.
Within the notice period,
Yep.
so that it doesn't fall into periodic.
Yes.
Because as soon as it falls into periodic, you as an owner, you basically don't have much rights to sort of get rid of them, other than, you know, they're breaching and they're not paying rent and all the rest of it, right?
It's interesting. It's
So you got to get a PM company that's onto that.
Yeah, 100%. And it's, as you're seeing there from a macro point of view, the government or the REIQ legislation, they all want to protect tenants right now, which, you know, is a positive, because it is quite sad what's going on out there. But as a landlord, if you're an investor, you need to know these things, because that can play into effect into your cash flows and when the property settles and all those sorts of things. So don't just rely on the sales agent telling you it rents for this. You need to know lease periods, periodic periods, like vacate, when's it, all those sorts of things. Are you getting maximum rent as well? Hence why a specific PM manager is very important, I feel.
Yeah. So, you know, this is where it becomes such a professional job, what we're doing now, because if we don't do the right things in the right time, like, it can go pear-shaped, right?
Yeah, there's consequences.
There are consequences. The second part to the new legislation is, a lot of tenants are going to love this one, is pets. So properties in Queensland can no longer be advertised as not pet friendly.
Really?
Yeah. And an owner has to have, from what I was reading the other day, an owner has to have reasonable grounds to not agree to having that pet, and they have 14 days to respond. If they do not respond within 14 days, it's considered accepted.
Yeah, wow. Jeez.
That's a big one. That is a big one.
Do you reckon you'll see landlords hiking the rent up for pet, or you can't do that? Like,
Yeah.
you can?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not like, you know, we're going to charge you $400 a week for rent and then $50 a week for your pet.
Yeah.
We're just going to charge you $450 a week. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, but it's, you know, like I say to my owners, I'm a fan of pets. I always think that, you know, the person that has a pet generally has a nice nature about them, and they are usually appreciative of the fact that they're allowed to have their pet at the property.
Yeah.
Our experience is that a lot of our tenants with pets are great people, and they look after the places and all the rest of it. And the thing is, in the lease agreement, any damage to the property caused by the pet's their responsibility, right? So you're still covered.
Yeah.
You know, it's just that what they're trying to do with the legislation is, you know, crack down on discrimination for pets and for people when they're applying, in their age and ethnicity, and all that sort of stuff. So
it's about time Crossy lets that lady rent his place. He's got the 12 cats. Don't discriminate, mate.
I said, listen, I had to cap it at 11, but if you've got 12, it's no deal.
Nah.
Am I going to get sued for that? Okay.
You need to get legal advice.
That's
my professional answer.
Well, it's been unreal. That one's mind blowing. Like, the amount of value added for tenants there with, mate, get your foot in the door, because it's savage as a tenant. Investors, key takeaway there was the PM side's like a business. You got to treat your asset like a business. So you got to have those partners who can support your asset long term. And then probably the biggest thing overarching everything is a high performing asset has a fundamental and a good cash flow return when it's in a location that has that supply versus demand imbalance, low vacancy rate, good employment around, amenities, all those sorts of things. Shaun touched on it all. So as an investor, huge opportunity. Right now, I know it sounds, it's sad in a way, but you're going to rent your place out if you're buying in a good location, you're buying well, you're going to get a premium rent. Then on the other side, for tenants, it's like, hey, you can see a little bit of a shift now it's going to make it a bit easier for tenants and a bit more achievable. So the government never wants people homeless, do they?
No, they don't. They're doing some pretty good things. Look, it is heavily geared towards a tenant, which as a an investor and owner of multiple properties, at times you do become a little bit annoyed about that. But then when you turn the telly on, you see what's going on with the rental crisis and that. You do have to have some empathy and be prepared to forego some dollars or whatever in order to for the greater good.
It's the cost of business, right? If you're getting that rental income coming in the weekly, that's the cost of business.
That's right.
The other thing that I would say to investors as well is that, sometimes ending your property purchase with the PM isn't always the best thing. This is why I love buyer's agents so much, is that you guys are providing these investors and, sometimes these homeowners on locations and what's happening on the ground, and you're educating them along the way. And by the time they come to us, you've done majority of the job for us, right? And then it's just our little part at the end. Sometimes, I'll get investors that start with me and they say, I'm looking at purchasing here. What are tenants like? What are they searching for? Do they want units? What are their habits? Do they want townhouses? So when they start with us, they know what the tenants are looking for and how much rent they're going to get, and then they finish with us. And if they're not doing that, then I'm a huge advocate of going through a buyer's agent who's going to actually be doing that with them the whole way.
Start with the end in mind. Want to cross these favourites.
One of my favourites. It's a good one.
It is a good one.
And that's an actual real life analogy or metaphor or play right there. That's a perfect one. So if you're an investor listening and you've decided not to use a buyer's agent, okay, that's fine. Best thing you could do, and think with the end in mind.
Yeah,
Shaun Carney.
It's crazy. I always say one of my favourite ones. If you're buying property and you want to invest in it, you're the commodity shelter. Unless shelter's going out of fashion anytime soon, weigh it up against Bitcoin. I don't know which one's more in demand. You tell me. Play the long game, baby.
Play the long game.
Play the long game. Hey, let's hit them with the 5. You reckon?
Fast 5.
This will be interesting.
Here we go.
I've been really interested. I don't know what's going to come out of his mouth here.
Look at him. He's looking around. He's thinking, man, what's this?
What are we doing here?
Just like your first tough carry in Q Cup. All right. So location, holiday home. So any dwelling type and any location worldwide, where would that holiday home be?
I do love Noosa.
Oh, mate, how many Sunny Coast ones have we had? Like,
we
can pick anywhere in the world. I swear we had about 3 or 4 people.
Mate, I've got a young
say
family.
Noosa.
I can't travel. Try and get me on a 16-hour flight with a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old.
Right. So just somewhere on Hastings Street, little
Mate,
unit.
just a couple of hours away while I have sleep.
You can see him with the linen on, the white shoes.
Could you imagine it?
Yeah.
Walking down the street.
Suits me, eh?
It does.
What about, all right, just a absolute cash cow investment somewhere in the world, any dwelling type, where do you reckon?
Manhattan.
Yeah.
Yeah. I went over there for Zilly's wedding in Ohio, and we jumped over to New York for a quick little trip. And man,
Talk about supply versus demand imbalance.
That's it at play right there.
That's
walk past Trump Tower. Yeah.
Geez, you need some capital to get into that market though. Yeah, crazy.
It's a good one.
Per square metre, I think it's most expensive in the world, isn't it?
In the world.
Actually, I think you're right, but I think London just overtook it last month.
Oh,
with
really?
A penthouse purchase.
Oh, really?
Interesting.
Yeah, don't quote me on that, but I did read something
Interesting.
about
Research to be done then.
There you go. All right, Bucks party. Whereabouts in the world is this? Mrs. doesn't know what's going on, so don't worry.
She doesn't.
No,
I don't need a whole pass.
You don't need
She's not even listening.
Okay, sweet. Jeez, I wouldn't most go to Vegas. I haven't been there before.
Yeah,
so,
okay. Yeah. You've never been?
No.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Have you been across it?
Don't get out much.
Never been.
Yeah, no.
Never been to Vegas.
Yeah,
No.
Yeah.
Oh, let's get married again.
Yeah.
You're up. Come on.
Go for Srams's Bucks.
Yeah.
I'm in.
And then where would the family home be? Obviously, you've got a bit of a young family now. Do you have any envisions on? You're still quite young, but where do you reckon you put the feet up?
Mate, we live in a beautiful part of the world. I don't think we're going to go too far from here, to be honest. I sort of grew up on a like a farm on a little coastal town in Port Macquarie. So coming up here, you've got everything that you need: the beaches and the opportunity. So I think we'll be settling here. I think for a long time.
And then lastly, mate, what's a key takeaway you can give to any buyers out there about to enter the market? And I guess specifically for you, investors would be a good one because you deal with them a lot.
I think my biggest tip is just to call the PMs on the ground. And it's more important if you're going to buy interstate, and you don't know the market. You might think that you do from jumping on realestate.com. But call the PMs because we're working in it every single day. Locally, call us anyway because you might be looking in a suburb that you like or you have an emotional attachment to. But for me, I don't like it and I avoid it, and I can give you reasons as to why you shouldn't buy there and all the rest of it, right? So I think, we touched on it before, start with the end in mind, start with us, find out who's going to live in your property and what they're willing to pay for it and what type of property they want, and then you go look for that property and then talk to us at the end.
Great tip.
I love that. That's actually great advice. Just as I'm sitting here thinking, a prospective investor in an area that they don't live probably or tends to probably call sales agents.
Yeah.
Sales agents are going to steer them towards the suburbs where they've got the most listings, where they can sell them something, where there's a quick cash grab. And that's not having to go at sales agents. That's just the reality of the business. They're remunerated for a transaction at the start. Shaun's in a business where remuneration goes on and on based on
the service,
service and a relationship and the management of a property, and it's an unbiased sort of opinion at the start, and that's really good advice.
Great tip. Yeah, investors, chat to the local PM and get a sense of, because that's who you're renting to. That's your avatar as a business. Like, you got to treat your asset as a business. Who's your target market? The PM knows well and truly what that is, what they're willing to pay, what achieves a better rent per week than others. So great tip there for buyers and especially investors. So it's been an absolute cracker. What do you reckon? The headlines this week, more on tenants, homeless and whatnot. You don't think it's slowing down anytime soon?
Nah, mate. I'm an ex-journo, so I know the headlines are still going to come.
Yeah.
Sells the papers.
Sells the paper.
Yeah.
Tell you what, I didn't realise Shaun was ex-journo. He's got the smooth voice. We might have to get him in more. He should interview us.
Mate, he'd be good on NRL 360.
Wouldn't he?
Let's flip the script.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. If there's any feedback, we got some exciting guests coming on, but we appreciate everyone listening in and leaving the feedback and whatnot. It's been epic, so we really do appreciate it. But thanks, Shaun, for coming on.
Thanks, boys.
Good on you, mate.